hope we get to answer.
I think you
record.
Pick up where you left off. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, great. So my recollection was that the question was, who do we call? Who do you call? Who do your constituents call if there is a concern about animal welfare, specifically livestock welfare? And my short answer is it depends. The longer answer is it depends because it is right now we have a municipal-based structure largely in Vermont. So the categories of human beings who are vested with the authority to follow up are either law enforcement officers that have been formally trained as such, animal control officers who are hired by the legislative body of the town, so the select board, and authorized to do those duties. And the comment was made earlier that some animal control officers only do certain things exclusive of these responsibilities. The other and then the other category would be employees of humane societies who are able to do these things. Now, in those latter two categories, there is training required in order to respond to animal welfare complaints. So each town is set up differently, depending on the town that the animal or the group of animals is located in. That would determine who in that particular town is going to follow up. Currently, because of the shortages that Vermont State Police and the workload and the dynamics within that department, Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Game Warden Service is providing backup support to state police for these cases. So in municipalities where it's the state police barracks that would cover this responsibility normally, it currently is shifted to the game wardens. And that complexity is exactly why people get so incredibly frustrated with the current system that we have, because people get bounced from entity to entity. In some towns, the animal control officer only does dog licensing or barking dogs, nuisance kinds of things. In other towns, they are they have full authority and the blessing of the select board to do more. But those are the categories of human beings and the qualifiers that have to be met. And it doesn't work well. And the game wardens are, my goodness, thank goodness for them. They're doing a fantastic job, helping and assisting, but through no fault of them, the structure that we have in Vermont is a challenging structure that could be improved upon.
Representative.
I just wanted to share with you, Jed, something that's been happening in Grand Isle is we had an animal control officer, but he didn't have the ability to ticket anybody. So, and everybody knew that. So we addressed that as a select board. And then we had a case of dogs running amok and then killing animals. Mm-hmm. And because he now had a statutory, like a judicial ticket book, he could do something. But then to take the dogs away from the owners who were clearly not able to handle them because this poor dog had 24 puppies in 8 months. Then we got the Humane Society involved, and then they had to come out. One of their people had to come out and do an assessment. So you kind of have to stay in for the long haul. And now that we have this system, and it worked beautifully with the Chittenden Humane Society, they were great. But then the lawyers got involved because we had to have a contract to basically surrender someone else's dogs. And it was a hassle, but the more you dig in, VLCT has great information for animal control officers, and we use their template, and you can expand it or contract it as much as you want. And that's a great, easy starting place because that really helped us. And then our animal control guy took a look at it and made some really great modifications that worked for our county. So it was great.
And I know the proposal that was put forward by the Department of Public Safety was to take all of that, large animal, small animal, poultry, and consolidate those responsibilities into a state level workforce, basically, similar to the way that the state of Maine operates. They have their animal welfare unit is housed within a state department. They have quite a few employees, 12 when they're fully staffed. But that's one option. But everyone also understands that takes resources and a budget, and things that make that difficult, but it's an option that could be looked into or discussed more. I know that the Animal Cruelty and Investigations Advisory Board would be happy to come in and elaborate on some of this for you if you want.
I don't want to,
Yeah, no, go ahead.
but this is an issue, I see it in wildlife. Tick-borne diseases for livestock. We're concerned, there are a lot of equine infectious, Nile. There's a lot of things, but are we seeing challenges in dairy or livestock herds with ticks?
Yes, and it was alluded to earlier with the climate changes, temperature changes, humidity, seasonal length changes. Some of the parasites that historically have not been in this area, we're seeing them inch closer, and therefore some of the diseases that ticks and other parasites carry are more of a risk over time to our homebody population of livestock in
But
Vermont.
for the moose population, it's really getting,
The winter tick.
Fish and Game is trying to change their management and to reduce herds in more vulnerable areas. But livestock, where they're husbandry we were at a great farm. It was amazing how the health of every single cow in a massive herd, they had electronic little things, the fevers. It was amazing, but
Yeah.
they're seen, but do we need to be concerned about ticks affecting livestock?
We do. So that's why you have me, my position, and our assistant state vet and our animal health program. We work and other parts of the Agency of Agriculture. We have colleagues, Nicole and I have colleagues who are out doing tick drags to see what, identify the populations of ticks and the most prevalent types that are in the area, similar to what's done with the mosquito surveillance, for instance. I haven't done it myself, but it's basically collecting ticks. And so it's going through an open area where they are likely to be and pulling through a net or a thing that then picks them up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It has-
Sounds fun, doesn't it?
And you
But then-
can screen the ticks by PCR for different pathogens. It's pretty cool.
Representative Rice, I'm sorry.
I was just going to point out that we were talking on the way here that it's supposed to be in the 80s in parts of Vermont, I think today or tomorrow. And the other big impact on dairy cattle due to climate change is warming, because cows they're very susceptible to heat stress. And I remember with the UVM herd one May, we had 2 or 3 days where it was in the 80s, and we had cows get, especially very recently freshened cows or cows that have calved recently, just very stressed by high temperatures, especially really early in the year when they haven't had a chance to acclimate. And I think if it does get into the 80s, we'll have herds beginning to endure heat stress in April in Vermont, which is a little bit mind-boggling. And so
Livestock generally do better if you have to pick an extreme, go with cold. And if they're well acclimated, they are fed well and are on a good nutrition plan, they handle the cold much better than the heat, as do I. And my nutrition plan probably isn't as good as some of the dairy cows in Vermont, so I don't know.
Representative Rice.
Yeah, two sort of unrelated questions. One is just to what extent is this recently featured on NPR? I think that this cow virus that is hopping over to humans. Is that?
Oh my goodness, I'm in.
is it an influenza?
It's an influenza.
I think, yeah.
Influenza D, I think they're calling it. They sort of like newly discovered, and then or several years ago, I think was discovered in maybe first in pigs, and then more recently they're finding that it's in like many cows, and that on those farms the farm workers are largely sort of showing to be carrying. It's not making humans sick. at this point, but it's sort of.
Flu viruses are very good at adapting and surviving in whatever way they can. And if that means adapting to new species hosts, including humans, then that's what they're going to do. And they'll probably be successful at it despite best intentions otherwise. So there are, take avian influenza as an example. The CDC still categorizes the strains of bird flu that have been floating around for the past year plus as low risk to humans, which is fantastic. But we're starting to see some of those. Historically, we've seen some of those equivalent viruses go back and forth between species, and previously have a greater impact on people too.
So is there good communication structurally between sort of like the people in your positions and the people in that sort of more human?
Yes.
Like in the context of pandemics, obviously, like.
Yeah, no, we have, I would say we have great communication between our agency, the Agency of Agriculture, the Department of Health, Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we've adopted in Vermont, as many states have, either formally or informally, a One Health model, which is the idea that human health, animal health, and environmental health are, you can't extract one from the other, and impacts good and bad in one impact every other facet. And so toward that end, we are frequently in communication. We have a ongoing session, both email and verbally. We just had a Teams meeting yesterday with those state partners discussing the things like what you are talking about. So we have great communication. And then also that expands nationally. There are national associations on both sides, all three sides, and we communicate all the time on these things. So I would say that part works very, very well.
And then my other question is just back to the sort of structural problems you were, so I represent Dorset Equine Rescue is in my district, and they seem, at least the way the way it's portrayed at home, they seem to play a sort of outsized role in the equine animal welfare issues sort of statewide. And I'm just wondering to what extent sort of nonprofits like that play that role, and is that part of the system that you think is working, or do you think that's part of the system that there's a disconnect or something?
So not singling Dorset Equine Rescue out. I just actually talked to their vet the other day, and they have my understanding is they have a great setup there to be able to manage, little disease incidences and other things that come up. The nonprofit question, though, is, I think, key, because what I hear from our humane societies in the state, for instance, is because of the role that they serve in the animal welfare response structure, both with regard to having that authority in some instances to investigate those cases, as well as in numerous instances being the default repository for animals that might be seized during investigations, or playing a role in that regard. That I know is problematic for some of the nonprofits, because they don't have the budget or the resources or the personnel to handle what they are doing as their core mission and core duties, and then also be the repository for seized animals, which a lot of times in the cases, if these cases are prosecuted, those animals have to be maintained as live evidence. So it's not as if the Humane Society, for instance, can get a group of seized dogs or cats or other animals and health screen them and then adopt them back out. They have to keep them. Sometimes for years. It's an untenable situation, is what I've been told from some of the nonprofits in the state. So they could speak to that more directly, but that's my understanding based on conversations we've had, and it's challenging.
Nicole.
Also unrelated, but I'm curious about the landscape of spacing for poultry in Vermont, especially on our larger farms. I know in order to get the label free range on an egg carton, you can have all these hundreds of chickens jam packed in soup, they can hardly move around, but you can have an little entryway into the sunlight, like caged in as well, and that counts as free range. But literally they have like centimeters to move around. And, you know, cages that were, like the animal doesn't really have the ability to even turn around in them because they're so tight. Like, I'm curious about if those kinds of things are going on in Vermont, and if that's, I don't know, been an issue that you all have dealt with, or what we could do. Those kinds of things.
So my awareness is that most of the birds that are raised in Vermont are either raised in indoor open areas, floor raised birds, or are pasture based birds, or alternate between those two depending on season and need and stage of life and that type of thing. And the standards that you mention those are all national, not government standards, but there are numerous certification organizations that if a producer wants to meet those standards of that certification organization and then be able to use that label or that information in their marketing or their business plan, then those things apply. But my understanding, what I've seen in Vermont and what's been reported to us, and we've gotten a lot more familiar with the poultry population in Vermont during the avian influenza ongoing situation. We've had lots of conversations with lots of people in Vermont that we previously didn't even know had poultry. So it's been great for us, and all of those individuals fit into the categories that I mentioned. But Ruth, do you have?
I'm not aware of any big lane hen houses, for instance, in Shadow Cross and Colchester. Actually, I don't think has had birds, even though they still were marketing eggs. I don't think they've had birds of their own for years.
They just stopped doing it.
Well, they did. They just stopped marketing eggs, but I drive right by their farm frequently and there are no birds there and haven't been for years. I think they're basically have just been a middleman. So, I think probably because Vermont's kind of an expensive place to have those sorts of operations. Our labor costs are high, our energy costs are high, our feed costs are high, and egg and poultry production is a very competitive field. So I think it's just not conducive to that kind of business.
I'm aware of one business in the northern part of the state that has, they're actually a Canadian-based business, but they have movement of product across the border. That's probably one of the largest, but otherwise, like we have in Vermont, we have turkey producers that raise 70 to 80,000 turkeys per year, but they're in the kind of environment that I described earlier. We have some contract growers in Vermont for Pete and Jerry's, if you've seen that label in the store, and they generally have in a reconfigured, oftentimes they're repurposed dairy barns, but they'll have up to 10,000 layers. But again, generally floor raised birds. And there are pros and cons, both animal welfare and disease mitigation pros and cons to having birds outside and having birds inside. And so it's a complex issue, but that's what I've experienced in Vermont so far.
A couple of our members had to leave to get off to another meeting, and I think we may have others who have to hop up in a moment. But the report that you mentioned, public safety report, have you given testimony in either the House or Senate? As one of the members of the other board, participated with two other members, the chair and then a third member, and we gave testimony to Senate Ag a couple months ago. Maybe 6 weeks ago now, but we have not I'm not aware that there's been testimony offered on the House side on that. I just pulled up the report and it looks like it wasn't directed to either of the ag committees, but rather the GovOps committee. So.
Yes, I know. We actually had a meeting of that board yesterday, and so I let them know that Ruth and I and Nicole were coming in to orient to the Livestock Council, and so we can chat about it Yeah,
Yeah,
it would-
great.
that would be wonderful. Happy to.
All right, well, let's take a break. Let's take a short break. We've got another group coming in a few minutes, so
It's very nice to meet you.
thank you.
Very nice to
Thank you
meet
so
you
much.
all and talk to you,
Yeah.
meet you again and talk to you about this. If you have any initiatives you'd like the Livestock Council, we jotted down the recommendation here, but if there are others, please feel free to reach out.
Yes.
And we can hopefully provide you some information for consideration.